Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has landed in Tel Aviv to visit one more time with his Israeli counterparts. He is trying to broker peace, so they say. But one of the issues that he's apparently trying to do is talk about some ceasefire talks. But then we really want to know what really is going on here. What is he really actually there to do? Does he actually try to broker ceasefire talks, or is this just a bunch of talk to really shield over what's happening militarily on the ground? I think that if you know anything about what we've said on previous shows here, the more likely outcome is that the Secretary of State is there to actually find out what he can do for the Israeli regime, and not the other way around. Maybe he does actually wish to go and give some of the pointers of the White House, what we would like to see. But it seems pretty unlikely that he's going there with any kind of firm message, if indeed there is any daylight between. But as we've seen, actually, I think in the New York Post today, they think there's a lot of daylight, actually, because they claim they claim that there's actually a war between Netanyahu and the White House, and this leaked intel is showing that just how big of a discrepancy that there is. The intel that are leaked, they're talking about there's one you may have seen mentioned already, that there was a top secret American document that discussed what Israel had been doing in preparation for a presumed retaliatory strike against Iran for the October 1st missile strike that Iran, which was itself in response to an assassination that Israel did in the capital city of Tehran. So what is the truth here? Is there daylight between the White House, or are we actually trying to get to ceasefire? Are we trying to impose our will on the Israelis and actually get these wars over with? Well, let's take a look at what some other commentators are saying, who at one point or another were high-ranking American officials. We'll start with John Bolton.
This whole argument that somehow Israel has to limit its right of self-defense because, in this case, Hamas is the one committing the war crimes by using its own civilian population as human shields. And if you say that strategy by Hamas is allowed to succeed, you are creating what I think the administration has created, which is a terrorist veto. Now, the Israeli government chose not to accept that veto, and they went in and constantly warned not to go into Rafah, and yet that's where Sinwar was, because that's where he had the most human shields around him.
Okay, so we're back to 1984 Orwellian speak here. Maybe that's the only setting that John Bolton has, but we're going to expose that here like we always do because we care about the truth. There's very little truth in what Bolton said in there, and let's start looking at the first part. I want to look at the last thing he said first because it says it gives the terrorist a veto. Terrorists get a veto if Biden gets his way. Well, if by that saying that we're going to not fight in a certain area, or that we want them to reach a ceasefire and they don't, and to have a ceasefire, he is literally equating a ceasefire with a terrorist veto. Like somehow the cessation of combat is a victory for the other side. Whereas, as I keep arguing, militarily, take the emotion out of it for a moment, militarily, Israel is on a pace right now, and it has an objective set that doesn't even have a chance to succeed militarily. Ergo, they're on a path right now of perpetual war, because the only way this thing ends is that either Israel just exhausts itself and it can't even continue fighting, or it finally kills all of the people or gets them all out, which seems pretty unlikely that is actually a possibility, though I guess I can't rule anything out at this point. But one of the other things that he said there toward the end of that first clip is that he said that, as an example of what's wrong with the White House's comments, he said, for a while there, back earlier this year, we said they gave a red line to Netanyahu. Biden did, don't go into Rafah. He did. Biden did say that. He said, don't go into Rafah. And Israel ignored what he said, went in there and did it. Now he's saying Bolton is trying to use that as an example of, see, and then that's where Sinwar was. But let's look at that, because what happened was, the Israelis ignored Biden and went into there anyway. And they went into the Rafah area, killed large numbers of civilian people, killed or destroyed a huge number of buildings and other infrastructure and other structures to make it nearly unlivable, and they didn't get Sinwar. Now they're claiming he was there all along. Well, then why didn't you get him the first time? If that's what it takes to go in there, then why did you not get him the first time? And of course, as we know now, then that was more a target of opportunity only because Sinwar came up and was who knows what he was actually doing. He was working with some of his senior commanders on the ground, and through various technology, whatever facial recognition technologies, I understand, they were able to identify him, and then they ended up taking him out. But that was part of the plan. So what Bolton doesn't even talk about there, and unfortunately, you see this is a consistent theme among American viewers, no thought given, no consideration given, no discussion given to the huge number of Palestinian innocent men, women, and children that were killed in the process. Totally off his radar. He could care less, doesn't have any humanity in him at all for the cost of it. It would be one thing if Bolton and many like him said, this is a military necessity. It breaks my heart to see these people dying. I wish there was anything we could do to eliminate that and to minimize that. But sometimes you have to make hard choices. I would disagree with that. And I would argue it on military grounds that it's not necessary and that it doesn't even have a chance for success on very practical, fundamental reasons why. But he's not even making that. He literally doesn't give any thought. In fact, he's more upset. Where he is upset is because Biden puts any restraints whatsoever on Israel than about a single one of these kids that, as we've talked about, has been assassinated by someone. They've had their heads blown off. They've had their chest literally blown off of their body. We've described that. We've shown American medical professionals who've been on the ground there have been heartbroken by this and sent a letter to President Biden talking about these very issues. No consideration. It's like it's not even like a dog. Frankly, if someone said that some dogs had been killed or some pets or something, people would shed more tears about that than he does about the human beings. That's one of the biggest problems that we have here right now. But now then, Bolton wouldn't finish there. He also wants to go in and try to convince you that it's only because of persistent presence of Israel that Sinwar was able to be taken out at all.
The administration has said repeatedly, you don't need all these Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip. You can use intelligence to continue to go after Sinwar and others. From all we can tell, and we don't have all the details, but it looks like a little bit of luck entered into the equation here, and some trainees in the Israeli military found and engaged Sinwar and a few of his friends. What that shows is that a persistent Israeli military presence in Gaza is critical to taking out the Hamas terrorist threat.
Okay, let's look at that, and let's pick apart what that actually means. So number one, again, zero consideration to the civilian population. I guess we just have to accept that as a given and move on to the next one here by saying, again, as an example, that the only reason they got Sinwar was because of persistent. That means you have to permanently keep the Israeli military all throughout the Gaza Strip, all the, whatever it is, I think 25 miles of territory where 2 million people live, or 2 million plus. Well, maybe there's not 2 million plus anymore. But that means that you have to permanently stay there. Is that what you want to do? Do you want to permanently garrison, meaning it'll be a permanent fight? Because I'm telling you, and it should be crystal clear to any normally thinking human being, if you're a population, an entire population, 2 million people are perpetually assaulted and blown up and killed and deprived of food, they are not going to be passive. Whatever ability to resist that they have, especially the men, will continue to fight. It's absurd to think anything else. I think that we think, or we want to believe anyway, that if you just use enough force, if you just kill enough of them, that they're finally going to break their human spirit and fall down. Would you do that? Let me ask you, everyone who's listening, would you do that? If enough of your family members gets killed, if a number of your friends, and if your house gets blown up and wherever you go to next gets blown up, are you finally going to say, okay, I just surrender. I'll just lay down and just lay in the rubble and let you do whatever you want. Are you going to do that? I mean, that's in the American DNA. We'll resist. I mean, you don't have to go any further back than our own Revolutionary War period. Obviously, we didn't. We never have at any point since that time either. We, in fact, look what happened on 9/11. Did we bow down? Did we give in to the coercion of whoever hit that, all the terrorist attacks that happened? Of course not. It just fired us up even more. So why then do you think that will work on this population? That they, unlike us, unlike everyone that we've seen anywhere else in the Middle East, in Vietnam, in Asia, or in Afghanistan, or Libya, or in Africa, where we've also been for decades. Why do you think that all of those people will be one way? We will be one way, but the people in Palestine will be a different way. Because that's what you want to be true, and you're unconcerned that it's not. And the only way that this ends is either the Israeli military finally exhausts itself, or they kill everyone, or in other words, some other way, literally ethnically cleanse the entire population out. And we're talking 5 million people, not 2 in the Gaza Strip, 5 million, I think, altogether. Or it may even be 5 million in the West Bank by itself as well. Otherwise, you will guarantee for yourself perpetual conflict. You will not bring peace to Israel. You will not let the Israeli state have any kind of modicum of a peaceful existence. So it's one or the other, but the way we're on won't have that. Now, one of the things you hear me complain about a lot on this channel, and I will continue to do so long as we have a channel and I have breath, and that is the utter failure, humiliation of the American diplomatic corps. So I've talked to you about the former Secretary of State Pompeo the other day, the current Secretary of State, who they seem more interested in being the Secretary of War than they do about diplomacy. Well, we can add another one to that list. Here is former Ambassador Kurt Volker, who's going to go on and say, actually, the risk of escalation are greater if we don't attack.
Mr. Ambassador, is America still trying to restrain Netanyahu?
Well, I think that is the official U.S. position, but I don't think Netanyahu is listening at all. The issue, as we've talked about many times here with you, is that Iran feels that it can act with impunity because we keep signaling we want de-escalation and we want to restrain Israel. And that puts Israel in the position of having to say, well, then we have to take care of things ourselves because the U.S. is not there.
A drone from Iran, we believe, or a Hezbollah drone, got very close to Netanyahu's house. Isn't that rather dangerous? Because the Israelis could really take out a mullah or two at a moment's notice.
Well, they could. And, this is the danger of not putting direct pressure on Iran up front, that they feel that they can get away with this sort of thing. And indeed, as you say, I think the risks of escalation are greater if we continue to signal we don't want it.
Okay.
That is just, irrational. And it's illogical, not to mention immoral, to say that, we just have to be upfront with our military force. So he's arguing that we should already have directly attacked Iran and that there's something wrong with the administration to want to restrain Israel, that we should not only have not restrained them, but that we should encourage them, if not outright help them. And he actually makes the argument, you heard him there with your own ears. He just said that there's something wrong with the United States because we're not doing what Netanyahu told us to do. Yeah, look, if you're the Israeli ambassador, fine. Get paid by the Israel and go over there and lobby for Israel. But you're allegedly a former American ambassador. You should be looking out for America's national interest. That should be predominate over anyone else, even the best of allies. Above, not equal to, above. That's how it's supposed to work. That's what Israel does. They place their needs above everyone else. Every country does that, or most countries do that, except apparently the United States. Russia puts Russia first. China puts China first. Well, Britain may not. I don't know. I guess they're kind of in the same batch that we are, but certainly the United States does not, or at least many advocate that the United States should not put its needs first, but someone else's. And even if that means giving our blood, our treasure, our defense capacity to other people to fight wars that they may need to fight that we don't, that has nothing to do with our national security. He actually condemns our government from not doing more for someone else. And listen, it's also odd because you had both Bolton and Volker calling out the administration for being weak and for not helping and restraining Israel. You know, that's what they really condemn for, is like we're holding them back. But yet when you actually look at what the administration officials said, the guys who actually are in charge, I don't see a lot of holding people back. Watch Austin here.
The numbers of casualties civilian casualties have been far too high. We'd like to see, Israel scale back on some of the strikes that it's taking, especially in and around Beirut. And we'd like to see things transition to some sort of negotiation that would allow civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes. That's the point that I'll continue to make with Minister Gallant. And I think, yes, he does take on my input.
He does take on my input. Does that sound like somebody who's restraining Israel? We told them don't go into Rafah. They went into Rafah. We told them take care of, and I'm talking from the beginning, use targeted intelligence-driven operations to minimize to the maximum extent possible civilian losses. They blew that off and instead wiped out entire sections of the city. Destroyed every capacity that the entire strip, all 25 miles wide of it, to self-sustain. There's no capacity to do that now indefinitely for so many years into the future. Anyone who lives there is going to have to be sustained from the outside. They've not listened to us on that. We say we really urgently wanted a ceasefire in Gaza. They wouldn't give it to us. We said we wanted a 21-day ceasefire in Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They wouldn't give it to us. We said we want a two-state solution. They spit in our face. Israel just effectively spits in our face, unequivocally, in your face says, no, there will be no two-state solution. So does that sound like to you someone who is holding back Israel? And now even having this leaked document here, information that says we're basically passively aware of their late stage preparation for, at least based on this intelligence report, a large scale Israeli strike into Iran. Now, there's nothing in there about what was going to be targeted, but based on all the weapon systems that they were talking about and the ammunition that they're talking about moving around and the scale of the number of aircraft and all these other things, implies it's going to be a substantial strike, not just some one-off like Iran did the last two times in April and then again on October 1st, where it was largely symbolic, didn't kill anyone. This one, at least according to what the Israelis are saying themselves, is going to be very lethal and powerful. We'll see what works out there. One would hope that what Secretary of State Blinken is doing there right now is trying to put the brakes on and is trying to stop some of the worst impulses, because, by the way, that's his job. He's our chief diplomat that's supposed to be looking out for our interest. Now, one wonders why these guys here are so eager to be sending American troops, American ammunition, American warplanes, American naval assets, etc., to be used by Israel for whatever they want to do, and oblivious to the fact that it's dwindling down our resources, dwindling down our stocks of key weapon systems that we may need if we get sucked into a war, and potentially putting at risk American troops in the area. That's one of the things that just really irks me about not only are these guys wanting to put Israel first using American assets and American personnel, they're unconcerned that American troops could be asked to die for Israel's country, not for our country, not for our national defense. And I find that absolutely abhorrent. And well, I also want to show, okay, so those are diplomats here. Let's look at what a former retired four-star general, former CIA director, David Petraeus, has to say, because he has some interesting thoughts on what could happen as well.
What really needs to happen is there needs to be a commitment by the prime minister to a political vision for the future of Gaza which for the first time says, we're going to get Hamas out of this completely. We're going to establish security. We're going in and we're going to stay, not just conduct these raids. And then we're going to provide a better life for the Palestinian people. That will enable bringing in Palestinian security forces trained by the Americans in Jordan. Then Arab forces will come in, organized humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, restoration of basic services. You do it sequentially from north to south, a series of walled-off, gated communities, as we called them during the surge in Iraq, which worked in Fallujah, Ramadi, Baquba, Mosul. This is how we broke the back of al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Sunni insurgents, destroyed them in the end. Keep in mind, destruction means that they cannot reconstitute. And right now in Gaza, Hamas is able to reconstitute, albeit without the weapons that used to come through the Rafah crossing in the south and underneath the southern border between Gaza and the Sinai, which now Israel rightly controls and should not give up.
Okay. That again, it may sound like plausible if you don't know anything about what he's talking about when he refers back to what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, or if you don't know what's actually happening on the ground here. Because let's sticking with the theme of no thoughts given whatever to the people. What does he think is going to happen to the people of Lebanon and to the people of Hamas, of Palestine, I'm sorry, in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank? He said they should basically wall them off and segment the society. That's what he said. He said that's what happened in Baghdad. And that did to an extent happen in Baghdad. We did physically put barriers up through a lot of that area to make it like this maze where there was, only a handful of ways in and out so that they could control the movements of any of the Taliban, the insurgents at that time that were moving in. That was a temporary measure. Then they pulled them out. But that's because Iraq was its own country. Iraq, the country, was fighting against external fighters in there, people who were against the government there, that they wanted to get rid of them, which then, for different reasons, I won't go into all of it here. You can see some of our previous work where I told you what actually happened and why the violence went down, not because of these walls that went up. That was a minor issue that was around the side that facilitated the bigger issue, which was basically, just generally speaking, that al-Qaeda in Iraq overplayed its hand. It should have been the natural ally of the Sunni insurgency, but instead they turned against each other. So the Sunni insurgency turned against al-Qaeda by bringing us in to help destroy them. And then we ended up brokering in a deal between the Shia and Sunni that fell apart after we left, but that's a separate issue. It's a temporary condition. So I guess it actually is instructive in that. But then then you had the people of Iraq. Then that was their population. So of course they got rid of the barriers, and once they got rid of the fighters. That's not the case here. I mean, the Gaza Strip is Palestine. It's the Palestinian people. Hamas is drawn from the Palestinian people. And even if you killed all of those, you can't leave them permanently set off, because, I mean, who are you going to seal them from? I mean, especially if you look at the West Bank, it's already incredibly segmented. And you see that doesn't do anything about making people feel more secure or more prosperous and have a hope, as he ridiculously said at the beginning of that. You're not going to get the population acting in a passive and peaceful way unless they have peace. Unless the threat to them to be blown up and destroyed in large numbers is eliminated, unless they have some prospect for living in freedom. I mean, because what he described there is straight up a jail, almost like a maximum security deal, where just small little cubes. I mean, it's almost like cell blocks. Maybe they'll be, I don't know how big he envisioned them to be, but it doesn't matter, because what he's saying is that you should segment off the entire population, and somehow you think that they're going to be passive and okay with that. I'm telling you that they're not going to be. One of the other things he said in there was that this is what we did in al-Qaeda. Okay, to compare the Iraqi insurgency and al-Qaeda in Iraq with Hamas in this place is radically different between night and day, because the Iraqi insurgency was basically against the American occupation. And they had a different view. So it was, in a sense, kind of a civil war, because once we took Saddam Hussein out, the smaller Sunni population, which had the power and was dominating over everybody, and they had a political stasis, had been for decades before, was thrown off when we took out the instruments of power for the Sunnis, and that unleashed basically a civil war. So that's what that was really about all the time. We got in the middle of a civil war we helped create by neutering one of the parties and allowing what had been the more numerous but weaker party to rise up against it. So once they got some kind of modus of a willingness to work together and cooperate, then they at least had a modicum of some sort of stability, which was on and off after that. That's not the case here. This is not like two sects of the same Arab community, two different Muslim sects trying to work out some differences here to try to coexist. This is the Arabs who despise and utterly hate the Israelis because of how they've been imprisoned since 1948, and the Israelis who despise and utterly hate many of the Arabs in large numbers. Not all the Jews hate the Arabs. There's a substantial percentage of the population that's numerically large, and you see a lot of their protesting quite frequently in Tel Aviv and other cities. But percentage-wise, they are smaller. And those on the other side, as numerous reports have been chronicling and documenting of late, they absolutely hate to the point of they want all of the Arabs out. They don't want any of them in. They detest them. They view them as subhuman. They don't even want to have anything to do with them. And as long as you have that dynamic, that is not going to be solved by partitioning off here or there inside the Gaza Strip. All you're going to be doing is just festering the problem that preceded October 7th of 2023. That all of the explosion that we had on October 7th was because of what preceded it. And now then, you want to take a situation where you want to go almost back to the status quo ante of what it was like before then, and somehow think that the even worse conditions levied upon the people of Palestine is somehow going to have a different outcome. It's not going to. So you have here across the board that you have politicians who are allegedly American politicians lobbying for another country, who are willing to sacrifice our sons and daughters for their war that we don't need to fight, not even prioritizing at all American national interests, or just literally generating and making it up out of thin air when there's clearly not any American security interests that are at stake here. And then they're saying, yeah, and our recommended solution is to let you go hog wild and do whatever you want anywhere. Now, the one thing that President Biden has so far, we don't know for sure if he's not green-lit or exactly what's going on about whether Israel is going to respond against Iran. Now, they haven't done it so far. I would have thought they would have done it up to this point. We don't know if that's because they needed more time to rehearse and to prepare and to get logistics set up and to have a well-executed plan, a well-resourced to have trained everybody so that they'll have a good chance of success, or if it's because behind the scenes, you've had some of these senior American officials and Biden himself putting pressure to not do it because having a war would be really bad for the United States. And as I said, it could end up getting us sucked into a war. But we do know now, because of this leaked information, that it appears by Biden's own words that he has either greenlit or is now aware of and is not going to do anything to stop an Israeli response. He was asked this, I think it was last Friday, if he knew anything about what Israel was going to do. Here's what he said.
But do you have a good understanding right now what Israel is going to do in response to Iran's October 1st attacks and when they will actually respond to Iran?
Yes, it is.
Can you tell us?
No.
Sir, did you hear anything?
Okay, so you hear it there from his own lips. Yes, I know what Israel is going to do. Yes, I know when they're going to do it. And he's just not going to tell you. So one wonders then, what is the purpose of Secretary Blinken in Israel right now? Is he trying to encourage him not to do that, or are they just coordinating issues? So whatever happens next, we're at least aware of it. Because what no one of these guys that I've just shown you and many others we could have selected are saying anything about is what happens next. What do you think Iran is going to do? Do you think Iran is going to behave like you want the Palestinian people to behave? And if you just hit them hard enough, they'll just lay down and roll over and die? Or that, yes, that we're afraid now, we're deterred, so we'll go into a shell and we'll capitulate to whatever you want to do. I don't even know what they actually think. Or will they do what they've been saying? And there was an Iranian diplomat to the United Nations today has said that if the U.S. does this, and he was citing here that the U.S. president had signaled tacit approval for Israel's attack. They said the United States will bear full responsibility for its role in instigating, inciting, and enabling any acts of aggression by Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as for the catastrophic consequences on regional and international peace and security, they said. And that's where they ended it and left it right there without being spoken. Now, Gary, if you can show that map of the region here, let me just show you our vulnerability and how weak we are and what could be coming next. Those guys don't want to talk to you about what may be coming next. All they want to do is talk about cheerleading for Israel and yay, let's bomb Iran, our arch enemy. But they're not looking at how vulnerable we are in the area. I have been screaming from every media platform I can get, especially on Fox News from 2018 onward to this very moment, that all of these troops we have in the Middle East, especially the ones in Syria, Iraq, and in Jordan, are nothing but strategic vulnerability points. They do absolutely nothing to help secure America. They're not performing any national security purpose that benefits our country. They are just points of vulnerability. And this is what I've been talking about from the beginning. We are in a situation now where if Israel carries through what this leaked document says that they're apparently on the threshold of doing and attacks all these targets in Iran, that their response could come not just against Israel, but against us, against the United States for helping foster this. And all those troops in those areas that we just showed on the previous map, all these little dots there, especially the ones in Iraq, Syria, and in Jordan, I've been on some of these before. I've been on bases that are similar to these. And I can tell you that many of them are just small outposts. And we spent almost as much time providing for our own base security as we did for any other kind of purpose, any other missions we may have had. But our base security are for small arms fire. It's for maybe drones and mortars or small rockets, etc., something that a militia would have. We have some decent defense against that. We have no defense against ballistic missiles at all. None. Not even inadequate, just none. There's nothing that can stop those kinds of strikes. So if Israel is attacked and if Iran is hit in a hard way where they suffer casualties, even if it's not the nuclear facades or their energy infrastructure, but if it's something military related and they actually have some of their troops killed or their bases destroyed or their infrastructure destroyed, it is entirely possible that they could make good on their threats and attack not just Israel, but America. We're much closer. It's a lot easier to access. They have troops that are on the ground. They have definitely the missile force to do it. And like I said, there's nothing we could do to stop it. They have shown, they have demonstrated to Saudi Arabia, actually, some number of years ago, that Iran has the capacity to hit absolute pinpoint strategic targets if they want to. We've had MIT professor Ted Postel on. He's demonstrated exactly what we're talking about here. And he showed where some Saudi oil refineries were hit with pinpoint precision. And that had Patriot systems allegedly defending it, and that didn't do anything. Now imagine some of these American bases, if they also have pinpoint accuracy, they can kill large numbers of Americans. They can hit the mess hall. They can hit some of the places where the troops sleep. They can find out where there's troop concentrations. They could kill a lot of Americans if we, through Israel, enable the killing of a large number of Iranian military members. And then, of course, once that happened, it's inconceivable that the president and the Congress would not respond like they did after 9/11, and then we're into a war. I mean, just almost like that. It's just as simple as that could be. Of course, I think there's plenty of people who desire that and who are looking for that very outcome. Benjamin Netanyahu's got to be number one. I don't care what anybody says. The evidence screams that he is doing everything he can to draw us into a war so that we fight on his behalf, because he definitely does not have the military capacity to fight and win a war against the Houthis in Yemen, against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, against the Palestinian people in the West Bank, and against the Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon, and against Iran. Nobody has that kind of combat power of this relatively tiny nation in the middle of the Middle East. He has taken on way more than they can chew. And the only rational path would be he wants to draw the U.S. in, because if Netanyahu thought he was only going to fight with his own military, he would never have undertaken this, because you have to put capacity with a desired end state. You have to have the resources, both personnel, equipment, ammunition, and the ability to sustain all that, and the logistical systems. All of that stuff has to go into a calculation. Can you achieve whatever this objective you want have? And if you can't, then you have to change your objectives, or you have to not take on to this operation. That used to be common sense. No longer. It certainly seems that Netanyahu has just thrown caution to the wind and thrown ration and logic to the wind, and has embarked upon a course which has no apparent obvious end state, no ability to accomplish any end state. And he's trying to drag us into it. And unfortunately, our most senior leaders and people who have been are either oblivious to it, or they have some other agenda. I truly can't say one way or the other, because both are possible. What I can tell you with a great deal of confidence is what they're recommending and what they're suggesting is militarily unworkable and ignores human nature, and even morality, ignores the suffering of the most weakest population in the area. And listen, yes, I know what happened on 10/7 was a terrorist attack, and it deserves to be responded to. There's, as a military man, I don't see any legal or moral or ethical portion that says that Assad, who has been abused, can launch into and just kill wantonly lots of civilians. So I know some of you don't agree with that. That's my opinion. But what absolutely is just as much constraint on the Israeli side is what they have done afterwards. And as I have argued plenty of times, there were paths that the Israelis could have taken, which would have been justified under international law and would have taken care of the population. But that's not their interest. Their interest was never to take care of the population. Their interest was to destroy the ability to sustain life, and they have succeeded at that already. We haven't seen the ramifications of that because the fighting is ongoing. But they have already succeeded in making the entire Gaza Strip unlivable. Recent reporting has shown that it'll take up to 8 decades of time and billions upon billions of dollars to be able to ever just rebuild what was destroyed there. And who knows where that money's going to come from. But for as far as the eye can see, that to be able to, again, rebuild a system where 2 million people can live where they were is just astronomically difficult. And that process hadn't even begun yet. And every day we keep dropping more bombs adds to the problems that's going to be faced by somebody at some point. So that's your bottom line here, is that whatever Blinken is doing in the region, it doesn't seem to be taking care of American vital national interests. Nobody at all in this is thinking about what comes next. There's no plan for it to reach any kind of an achievable political or military outcome. And the result is going to be continued chaos for as long as the eye can see right now. That's where we are. Well, listen, always appreciate you guys coming out and watching us today. Definitely want to tune in this afternoon for Larry Johnson at 3 o'clock, where we're going to be looking at some of the issues going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. You always want to tune in to see that. That's one of our favorite shows and one of a big fan favorites, Larry the Shirt Johnson. See you at 3 o'clock this afternoon.